This episode of Meet Your Neighbor is brought to you by Golden Food Pantry, providing for all of God's people with food, necessities, and a community of caring, loving folks.
Nobody takes this journey by themselves. Nobody. If you are going to succeed, somebody somewhere along the line is going to help you. And I was no exception to that. I had people that for some reason, one reason or another, saw something in me that they would take a chance on me. And it all started at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, when I was in the Air Force and I was learning photography. Got out of the Air Force. Well, actually, still in the Air Force, I went to a pawn shop and bought my first 35 millimeter camera for $10. Took a picture of a cat in a tree, entered it in the base photo contest, won $10 for second place. Took the camera back to the pawn shop with that $10 and bought another camera. And the rest is history. I now have spent somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 on camera gear over the years. But anyway, out of the Air Force. By that time, I really knew I wanted to be a photographer. And I really wanted to work for the local newspaper in Corning, New York. I had no background other than the Air Force. And the gentleman by the name of Dick Peer, who was the editor of the newspaper, and George Bevan, who was the managing editor, they took a chance on a kid who really didn't have any college. They taught me how to write, and I grew as a photographer. And I then branched out. I had another fellow by the name of Arthur H. Richards, Jr., white-haired. I thought he was very old, which means he's 10 years younger at that point than I am now. He kind of took me under his wing. He worked for a competing newspaper, but he liked the kid. And he was from Watkins Glen, and he showed me how to craft stories, tell stories. And it was really wonderful. And so I went from there to stringing for United Press International by shooting pictures of Cornell University football. And at one of the football games, Princeton was playing Cornell, and Cornell stood their defensive tackles up and the defensive backs jumped on their shoulder pads and they stood straight up in the air. And Princeton's Charlie Gogolak, kicked a 54-yard field goal over their outstretched fingertips. And I shot a picture from the end zone as the ball cleared their fingertips. And that picture appeared full page in Life magazine. In those days, I was making $75 a week. That picture paid $200. I thought I had just died and gone to heaven. And that picture got some people's attention. Ultimately, I applied for and got a job as a writer with United Press International, starting in Buffalo. My want was to be a photographer with UPI. But Clayton Ford Richards, who worked for UPI already, the son of the gentleman I just mentioned, his advice to me was take the job as a writer and worry about transferring over into the picture department later. And so that's what I did. But you notice there were people that helped me grow, and then there was another person who helped me get with UPI. And so the journey begins that way, with other people helping me. Once in Buffalo, New York, as a writer, I started taking pictures because they didn't have a staff photographer there. And the Corps of Engineers that year were going to shut off the American Falls at Niagara Falls. So a week before they did all of that, I went over on the Canadian side and I took a picture with a 50 millimeter lens of the American Falls. And then the day of it, I made notes of where we took the picture from and everything, went back and shot another picture of it. And then we ran those two pictures, the before and the after. And the neat thing about that was, and the exciting thing for a young person was, those two pictures were one over the other on the front page of the New York Times the next day. And I knew that. But the following day, the AP bureau manager that was on the floor below us in Buffalo, he called me and he said, I've got something to show you. And so I went down, and he showed me the front page of the New York Times, and there was a note on it from his editor in New York saying, why couldn't we have done something like this? And of course, my ego, my head just swelled up like a pumpkin. You know, I was just on my way. Then we had some other things happen in Rochester. I got transferred to Rochester, New York, and again, I was still in the writing department, the news department, and a fellow named Lou Castles came through. He was doing a series of articles on cities that had had racial unrest during the previous year or two. And he was spending a day or two interviewing people. And when he arrived in Rochester, New York, I had gone and I had done a great deal of interviewing of people ahead of him, so he would know what he was getting into. And he took a look at my notes and what I had written for him. And he said, I really don't need to stay here. Thank you very much. And he said, I'm going to get on a plane in the morning and go to New York City. And he did. So I had basically, without knowing it at the time, I had done a great deal of his work for him and saved him some time. He got back to New York, called me, thanked me, said, what do you really want to do with UPI? And I said, I want to be a photographer. And he said, I think we can handle that. And I got a call within a day or two. There were 2 openings in the United States. One was in California and one was in Philadelphia. And I chose Philadelphia. And it was there that I met the most imposing human being of my life, Wilt Chamberlain. And here was this 28-year-old kid out of the small community in upstate New York, and I am walking up to this 7-foot, 4-inch, 285-pound, whatever he was, human being, and I looked up at him and I said, Mr. Chamberlain, I need to take your picture. I thought he was going to die laughing. He was gracious. He was very nice. And those were the times in Philadelphia that I spent a year there. And during that time, there was the infamous, where the Philadelphia fans, the football fans, supposedly threw snowballs at Santa Claus. Well, you have to remember that was the year that Joe Kuharich was their coach, and they had a horrible team. They were really bad. And what really happened was Santa Claus was making his rounds around the stadium. And it was halftime, and the Eagles were coming out from their dressing room to start the third quarter, and Kuharich was in the middle of the players. He wasn't running in front of them, and he wasn't running behind them. And most of the fans were throwing snowballs at Kuharich as Santa Claus was going by. So depending upon your point of view and where you were standing and what you saw, it looked like they were throwing snowballs at Santa Claus. My belief always was that they were throwing snowballs at Joe Kuharich. So then we had an opportunity. After being in Philadelphia for a year, we covered Miss America there. We did some neat stories. The big regret of my life is that I didn't take advantage of going to the museums in Philadelphia while we lived there, because they have a large number of museums. I was young and I was always going to be in Philadelphia. I didn't realize that in 1969 I'd be moving to Dallas, Texas. And I moved to Dallas, Texas because I really wanted to get to Denver. And I thought, boy, so far I've played this game pretty good. I've gone from Buffalo to Rochester to Philadelphia. Now if I can just get to Denver. Well, Dallas, to me, on the East Coast, Dallas was partway to Denver, and I thought, you're going to get to Denver one of these days. And that never really happened, although I got to Denver to work on occasion. I didn't get to go there and be in their bureau. The gentleman who was a photographer in Denver stayed in Denver all the time I was in Dallas, and therefore there was never an opening in Denver that I could move to. Once in Dallas, I had some people who were very helpful. Some of them were on the news side, but one of the sports writers, a fellow named Mike Rabin, was one of the people who could always steer me in the right direction. We were going to, he would tell me at a major event who the important players were if I didn't know. An exceptional writer in his own right. And I had editors like in New York, there was a 300-pound Italian editor named Larry DeSantis, one of the great photo editors of my lifetime. And he encouraged not just me, but all the UPI photographers. He encouraged us to reach out, do something different. he would say, don't give me another second base slide. I don't care if you fail, if you make a mistake, try something different. He was doing that in my early days in Philadelphia. That continued into Dallas. And what that led me to do was to experiment using longer lenses. And when I say that, it was typical, and it is for most of the guys right now. If you're covering an NBA basketball game, they will literally sit at the end of the court, and as people come towards them and they get near the foul line, they'll shoot pictures of the people driving to the basket. You know, where it's like shooting fish in a barrel. All the players are coming here. And I thought to myself, there's got to be another way. There's a lot going on at the far end of the court. So I took a 300 millimeter lens to a basketball game with me, and all my cohorts in Philadelphia looked at me like I had a screw loose. They thought I was nuttier than a fruitcake. But I started shooting pictures at the far end of the court. When they come this way, I'd shoot with my 50 millimeter lens or my wide angle, and they were down there, I'm shooting with the 300. And one of those pictures that I took won second place in the National Press Photographers Association contest that year in Pennsylvania. And it was a wonderful picture of Billy Cunningham and Rick Adelman fighting for a loose ball. I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't been using the longer lenses. Now, fast forward a little bit further, and we come to Dallas, and now I've got my 600 millimeter lens, and I took it to a basketball game, and everybody at the end of the court with me, they're wondering, what are you going to do with that? And I didn't say a word. I didn't want them to know what my plan was. But at the end of the game, it was an NCAA basketball game between Arkansas and another team to see who would go to the Final Four in Denver. When they were cutting down the nets, I got that 600 out, and I shot pictures from this end of the court at the other end of the court. Now, here's the difference. All the photographers at the far end of the court, they're like this. They're down here, they're shooting these guys up here with the net. Basically, they're looking up their nostrils. I'm at the far end of the court, and I'm shooting at this angle. It makes the viewer look like you're right up there at the rim of the basket with them as they're cutting down the net. That's what the picture looked like when it showed up in the newspaper the next day. So you see the angle it's at? So not only do I have a better angle, I'm not even fighting shoulder to shoulder, pushing and shoving with the other photographers and the cheerleaders and all that stuff. I had it all to myself. That's one of the things that I take a great deal of pride in, that I expanded with the encouragement of Larry DeSantis. I expanded how I viewed things and how I would shoot pictures. And so I've taken butterfly pictures with that 600 millimeter. I've taken hummingbird pictures with that 600 millimeter. I've taken portraits of people with that 600 millimeter. I've got pictures of people blasting out of sand traps. And I've used it. That became part of me. That was as much me as my fingernails. The thing about photography that is, it's almost like being a baker. It's almost like being a builder of buildings. There are ingredients in pictures. And every day you don't go and shoot Super Bowls. I've been to 14 Super Bowls. I've been to 8 Masters golf tournaments. I've been to the Olympics. In fact, the picture behind me of Bonnie Blair setting a world record, winning the gold medal, was taken at the Winter Olympics in Calgary. And I've been to all these places. And what I would say to young people, you don't go to these things every day. And just like a builder doesn't build the Taj Mahal, he doesn't build the Empire State Building every day, he sometimes builds chicken coops. But whatever it is you're doing, build the best chicken coop you can build. If it's the Taj Mahal, have at it. You'll make a lot of money. You won't make as much money at chicken coops, but you'll have a great deal of pride in what you did. And if you build enough good chicken coops, people will knock on your door and say, I need a chicken coop. Whatever it is. If you're baking cake, some days you're going to make a wedding cake, other days you're going to make chocolate chip cookies. Just make sure they're the best chocolate chip cookies and the best wedding cake you ever made. People will knock down doors to get to you and buy your product. So anyway, most interesting person I ever met in my life, hands down, Ross Perot. I was just absolutely fascinated by Mr. Perot. most intimidating person I met was Wilt Chamberlain, simply because of his size. And he didn't smile until I called him Mr. Chamberlain, you know. Met a lot of nice people in sports and in life. Journalism is like, it opens windows and doors that nothing else can open for you. In my career, I got to shake hands with people like Lyndon Johnson and Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. This wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been in journalism, and I know that. I got to meet a lot of people in business and industry. Didn't take advantage of it as others have. And by that I mean, I know a photographer that he followed up. When he met people that were in key positions, he made sure they had pictures in their hands and they knew who he was. And ultimately, he made a really nice living as a freelance photographer. So the thing I would say to young people getting into the business is, when you make good contacts through journalism, make sure that they know who you are, because at some point in your life, you might want to go beyond journalism. You might want to go into public relations. You might want to go into engineering. You might want to do anything, and those people can be good contacts for you. One day I walked into remember now, I've been all over the United States and been to all these Super Bowls, and now I've moved from Dallas because United Press International went bankrupt. Moved to East Texas. And basically, I needed to find work. And I didn't want to leave East Texas, and I really didn't want to go back into the daily newspaper business. And so one day I walked into the Mineola Monitor, and I looked at a lady named Joyce Hathcock, and I said, I need a job. And she looked at me and she said, well, who are you? And so I explained to her what my background was, and we got a little serious about the conversation, and she said, what would you expect to make? And so I realized I was going to have to take a step down the economic ladder, and so I quite conservatively said, well, I'd like to make at least $30,000. And I was talking to the publisher of the newspaper, and she said, well, Gary, I don't make $30,000. So I knew that my sights were set a little higher than I needed to have them set. Make a long story short, I went to work for the Mineola Monitor, and I thought it would be 2 or 3 years. I wasn't sure that my ego would handle moving from going to the Super Bowl to covering the Mineola Yellow Jackets. And I found out in rather rapid shape that my ego handled it quite well. That I enjoyed watching the kids grow, the kids compete on the field and the basketball court and the baseball diamond. And I had started out to stay 3 years, and I stayed 16. Near the end of that 16 years, I decided that I wanted to start a website. It's called EastTexasReflections.com. And with the help of a friend of ours, Neil Duncan, he handles all the technical stuff, and I did the stories and the pictures. And the reason we started this website was multi-reasons, but it was basically for people who move away from East Texas, who get homesick, in the military, college students, people in business who all their ties are in East Texas, and if they want a little bit of East Texas that they can look up on the internet and see, they can just pull up EastTexasReflections.com, and it's there. That's why it started. There was, however, another reason. The newspaper was printing all my pictures in black and white, and I got tired of that. I wanted to see them in color, and so I could put my pictures in color on the website, and that was another reason for doing the website. Now, the website, there are some expenses to it, and we have been fortunate to have some people back us and cover our expenses. We're not making any money, but we're not losing any money. And one of those is Rod Watkins, and he's the mayor of Mineola now, but he has an insurance agency, and he has been a supporter of the website from just basically almost day one, and a couple other entities in the county. It is, I hope, a continuation of what I think journalism is, and that is a recording of history. As a journalist, you have to understand a couple of things. You better be honest. If you lose anybody's faith in you, you're down the tubes. Nobody will trust anything you write about or photograph from that point on. So you need to be honest. The other thing that I think you need to understand is that you're in the entertainment business. You can, and you're also recording history. All of this stuff kind of melds together because you're in the entertainment business in that you have to make it interesting enough so that people will read or look at or watch or listen to. Doesn't matter if you're television, radio, newspapers, magazines. If you aren't interesting, you get tuned out. And therefore, you have to be interesting. So you're in the entertainment business, but you're also in the history business. And you meld those two things together and you'll be pretty good. You'll be fine. If you think you're just in the news business, you're mistaken. If you understand you're in the news business and the entertainment business, they get combined. It doesn't mean you have to do anything unethical. It means you have to be honest, but you have to do it in an interesting way so that people will listen, look at, watch, listen to. In photography, timing is everything. And I looked when I was shooting pictures of individuals for emotion, and this was a beauty pageant in Dallas at the Apparel Mart many years ago. And this is a picture I took as the winner was named, and it's hard looking at the picture to tell who won and lost. This picture, as it is right here, ended up in the New York City Museum of Modern Art. And I didn't know it until I picked up this magazine and saw that. But this is one of the things, timing, it's everything. And we'll take a look at some other pictures and we'll talk about timing there. Digital photography versus film. I was one of those latecomers to digital. I just couldn't make myself believe that digital could be as good as film. And then one day I was talking to a friend of mine who was also a photographer, and we knew some National Geographic photographers together, and I was talking about the quality, and the qualities just can't, I'm blowing smoke. I didn't know what I was talking about. And he looked at me very seriously. He said, well, Gary, he said, if you're so smart, he said, National Geographic shoots digital, so why can't you? And a little light bulb went on, or maybe a spotlight. And so I went out and bought my first digital camera. And the nice thing about digital is shooting Nikon. My digital bodies fit my old Nikon lenses, and it makes them longer. It turns a 300 millimeter lens into roughly 480, I think it is. And it takes my 600 and it turns it into just a little bit less than a 900 millimeter lens. And so now I'm really reaching out there, and I haven't spent any more money, and I like that part, okay? Now the other thing about digital that is really an advantage to all of us, it has taken average photographers and made them great photographers, because instead of going out and having a 36 roll of film, 36 exposure roll of film, you have this little chip in this camera that may hold 500 or 1,000 pictures. And you can shoot your brains out. Now, you may spend 2 hours editing, looking through all those pictures. But I submit to you, you take a decent photographer and you let him shoot 100 pictures or 200 pictures at a high school football game, and he or she will have really good pictures, because all you want are 2 or 3 pictures. And for that, I think digital photography has made photography more affordable, and it's made photographers better photographers, because you only get to see the very best pictures. Now let's take a tour of these pictures up here. This was a Super Bowl, pre-Super Bowl picture, taken in Denver with Pittsburgh. And it's one of those things where I told you earlier about Larry DeSantis always told us to try for something different. The game was winding down. UPI was in bankruptcy, so we had a crew of 3 shooting this game. And our competition, the Associated Press, had about 7 or 8 photographers there, so I knew we had to do something a little different. In the final minute of the game, Pittsburgh took over. They were trailing. Pittsburgh took over on their own 20-yard line. And I said to myself, if anything happens, anything good or bad happens, there will be a reaction on the Denver bench. And so I focused on the bench, and what I couldn't see, every other photographer in the stadium that I know of was covering the action on the field. The quarterback for Pittsburgh fumbled the ball and Denver recovered, and that is a reaction to it, because they knew at that moment they were going to the Super Bowl. Now, the neat thing about that picture was nobody else got it. I was the only photographer who got that. Had we had 5 or 6 photographers there, nobody would have gotten that, because we wouldn't have been looking for an edge. We were looking for an edge. We had to find an edge. We had to find something different. I got lucky, and I know that. And it's in focus, and I'm very thankful. This is a picture of Arnold Palmer that I shot. I think it was at the Masters, but I'm not exactly sure. And what I like about pictures like this is the sand flying, the ball's in the picture. What I notice about the pros, they all tell you, keep your eye on the ball, and you'll notice that his eyes are not. The eyes not down here, his eyes are on the ball there. This is a Super Bowl picture. At the time, this was the longest run in Super Bowl history, 73 yards by Marcus Allen. And what made that was again one of these pictures I shot with the 600 millimeter lens. A lot of the photographers wouldn't use long lenses because they were too hard to focus, and you had too many frames that were out of focus. And the truth of this is, the frame before that was soft and the frame after that was soft. That's in focus, and that's all that mattered. This picture down here was the same Super Bowl, and that was a high snap from center. That was the all-pro punter for the Raiders, Ray Guy. Caught the ball with one hand, came down. That was in his end zone, almost his end zone. He came down with it and got the punt off. And that was a significant play in the game, because had that gone just a few inches higher, or had he dropped the ball, the Washington Redskins might have had a touchdown, and the outcome of the game might have been far different. And then more recently, these are pictures I shoot now. I've taken all the skills that I learned covering football and basketball and baseball, and I pretty much use those same skills to cover wildlife. And this was an eagle I took pictures of out near Lake Fork, and it's got a crappie in its talons. And then I have a soft spot in my life for things like horses. And then we call these things Romeos because they always seem to be on the lookout for somebody. And I like these little lizards. They're kind of cute. But I tend to shoot a lot more of this now, nature photography, than I do sports and news. And when Debbie and we were at the Nabrisco Grand Prix down in San Antonio, it was 1987, and we were having some social moments, and there was an artist there, and they did that thing. And then this is a picture of myself outside the Olympic Stadium in Montreal, up there. This is Ray Floyd, and Nick Faldo just beat him in a playoff at the Masters. This is the picture that people define, pardon me, defined me by a picture that 3 or 4 of us, I think it was 4 different photographers, got basically the same picture. Larry DeSantis up in New York nominated me for the Pulitzer Prize in 1986. And to be honest with you, the Photo Lab in New York, we had another photographer named David Toulis. He shot basically the same picture in color. They printed the color picture, so it's a good thing I didn't win, because it would have been his picture and my name, and that just wouldn't have worked out. Okay? This is Nolan Ryan after his final no-hitter. And here we have Tom Kite blasting out of a trap. I think that was at the Colonial. Jack Nicklaus coming out of a trap. Lee Trevino in a trap. And then these pictures are the most recent pictures I've taken. This huge bird flew in, caught that fish in its beak, and flew away, and it was all gone within about 30 to 45 seconds, maybe a minute. And I have 6 or 7 frames on it. And then these other birds were fighting. This picture here is Bonnie Blair. She won the gold medal in record time at the Calgary Olympics. These 2 individuals here are golfers here at Holly Lake Ranch. And I do this, I take pictures of people in sand traps, and I call them sportraits. And then over here we have Greg Norman blasting out of a trap, and I think that was at the Colonial in Fort Worth. And up there you have Larry Mize. He is reacting to just chipping in to win the Masters in a playoff. That's Governor Bill Clements. And he had just been elected governor of Texas, and the Amarillo Daily News newspaper had the wrong guy winning. And he was having a good time with that headline. Much like Dewey way back in New York when they thought Dewey was going to be president of the United States, and he got beat. Mm-hmm. In 2012, I was named Journalist of the Year and Photographer of the, I'm sorry, hang on a second, Photographer of the Year. Both in the same, they are the two major awards presented by the Northeast Texas Press Association, and I won both of them in the same year. I also won Photographer of the Year the year before in 2011, and I won Journalist of the Year in 2010, and I won Photographer of the Year in 1997. So anyway, but I'm very proud that I was the Journalist and Photographer of the Year in the same year.